Alright, guys, welcome back. This is Operation Harsh Doorstop. This is essentially a milsim community made type of project. I don't really know how to describe it very well. From what I understand, it is mostly backed by a YouTube creator called Blue Drake, who is pretty prominent in the milsim and realism or hardcore FPS genre. And apparently, they had the idea to have a group come together and take things that they like about milsims, things they don't, and combine. Use a lot of community modding, use community outreach to kind of craft what they think will be, essentially the perfect milsim, or as perfect as you can realistically get. The issue with that is, well, let's start off just looking at the numbers, right? This game has only been out for 3 or 4 months, and currently you can see that the player base is not doing so hot. 51 out of 100, 31 out of 32. Look at the pings on these two. They're not exactly the closest group of people to me, and I'm in kind of borderline middle USA. So almost no US servers. I don't think a single US server is active right now. The best ping I'm going to get currently if I want to play the game is 539 ping, which is insanity. And again, most of these servers are either half full. Oh, hey, there's one. There is actually one. Never mind. I lied. There's one US server with 35 ping that I can play that has 25 out of 64 players currently playing it. So there's a lot of just issues with this game. The concept is cool. The concept is something interesting. I'm curious to see how this project continues and develops. However, there's a lot of people talking really highly of it. And this is just kind of my video giving my opinion on it. Like, as you can see right here, Drake Link Labs. But this is my video giving my opinion on the game. My genuine opinion. And at this point, I wouldn't even call it a game. It's more of just something they released so that they could get the SDK out there, so that they can then have the modders come in and create things for their quote-unquote game. Now, there's a couple of issues with this. First off, their base project is lacking. The nicest way I can put that is it lacks in just about every fundamental thing that you can want from an FPS, especially a milsim. So they're expecting the modders and the community to create these things of what the community wants. And that's going to be how, like, what they implement in is these popular mods and popular features that the community creates and implements. Which is an okay idea if you have a good core game, which they don't. A major issue with that alone, like, just the first thing that comes to mind is if you don't have a player base, you don't have a modding community. Currently, your game just came out, like I said, 3 to 4 months ago, and you already have under 200 people playing it in the middle of the afternoon. Under 200 people. So why would a modder ever work on your game? What makes people stick around, especially the modding scene? There's no community left. If your community is dead, the modders aren't going to create content for your game. They're going to go to something else. They're going to go to Squad. They're going to go to Arma. They're going to go to another milsim where they have this community still going, where they have people. Nobody's going to mod or create for your game with nobody playing it. And the reason nobody's playing it is because the base game it's honestly nowhere to be found. It's the most generic. It almost feels like an asset flip, but I'm pretty confident it's not. I'm pretty confident it was built from the ground up, but it's just so basic and so surface level that that's what it feels like, is a asset flip. It feels like something I would get on Steam for $5 from some company that's I've never heard of, that has made 10 other games using the Unity engine that they just bought a couple of packs for and have sold a couple of these trash tier titles. But there's a lot of issues with this game. There's a lot of issues spanning from the concept, the execution, the gameplay, the graphics, just about everything in the game currently has issue. And in this video, I'm going to go through and talk a little bit about the things that I have noticed, the things that I have issue with. And again, I don't want this to sound like I just despise this game and think it's completely and totally just trash and write it off right now as something you'll never look up again and never touch. I don't think that. I just think that they executed what they did poorly and in the wrong way. Because the main reason that they've released in this state is to give the community and the modders the tools to then start creating. And then they will start to slowly implement the ideas that the community likes based on what is popular in the modding scene. They left out, so they say, they left out a lot of your core gameplay mechanics and fundamentals because they want to wait. They want to release it like this without those core gameplay mechanics and without those fundamentals so that the community can drive it. The community can create and tell the game developers what they want as the core fundamentals and gameplay mechanics. The issue with that being is that if you don't have a baseline, you don't have something to start off with, you don't have anything to play, there's not going to be a community to tell you which direction to go in. And I think that's what we're seeing here. I think this project had good intention. I think it just had really, really poor execution. And so I'm going to go ahead and we'll get into this and dig a little deeper. I'm not going to spend a ton of time on it. I honestly wasn't even going to make a Operation Harsh Doorstop video until I was a little more confident in the direction the game was going. But at this point, honestly, I think they're just waiting for nails in the coffin. So let's go ahead and get into this. Okay, we're going to start off with, well, the most basic things, the general ideas in the game, the most common issues that people will see. So we'll start off with the graphics and the audio, right? The graphics, they're not terrible, but they're not good. They're lacking in basically every kind of way. The engine doesn't feel like it's very high-end, and yet at the same time, the game performs like absolute trash. It's not a well-performing game by any means, but yet it doesn't have the graphical fidelity to really require such performance issues to be able to point to, or hey, the game just looks really, really good. They've done these effects and these graphics so well that, yes, performance is going to be hindered. You're going to have to turn your options down on your machine. That's not what's happening here. This game looks very, very basic, and yet still acts like it's a high-demanding game. In terms of audio, I've heard a lot of mixed feelings about the audio. I personally don't enjoy it. I don't think it's very good. Like the more long distance fights, I think those sound good. Those cracking gunshots in the distance sound realistic and accurate to a degree, right? I think they've done that pretty well. But the actual up close combat just sounds weak. You firing your weapons, whether it's a Kar 98 bolt action, a Thompson submachine gun, a AK-47, a PKP machine gun, an M60 machine gun, it doesn't matter. All of them have very, very low, not meaty, punchy audio. They all have the same generic gunfire sounds. Like, they don't sound like their own weapons. They sound very generic and very bland. Especially for things that are the higher caliber weapons, such as the M60. Like, whenever I see an M60 in a video game, I automatically have to know how it sounds. if it doesn't have this hard-hitting, punchy sound effect to it, then you've failed. You may as well just take your M60 out of the game, because I no longer won't even look at it. You've disrespected the M60, so fuck right off. So let's go to the core mechanics that are currently in the game that are either meh or just kind of an actual issue. The movement in itself is okay. It's very basic. There's not a whole lot to it. We have an issue right now with jumping and vaulting. I can't tell you how many times I've tried to jump onto an object or vault onto an object or vault over an object only for the game to say no. And there's no real good indication on why this is or like how the vaulting or jumping works. I mean, there's several clips in this video of me trying to jump across the trenches only to make it, but then slowly fall backwards, just slip back off of the trench and into it. And then I have to do this run around the trench to try and find something that I can either hopefully jump onto to get out or just find the nearest exit, which is usually a solid 1 minute run plus to either side of the trench. And there's no really good reason for this. It kind of just feels like they implemented vaulting in the most basic way just to have the ability to say, hey, we implemented vaulting, there you go. So not only that, but the gunplay, that is another thing that feels very, very generic. No guns feel different. I'll get more in detail on that because I have an entire section of clips for us to go over in terms of gunplay, but it's just generic. It doesn't feel good. The maps, I understand, they're going to be generic. They are very early access, and they're not super detailed. They're not really well fleshed out yet. I'm giving the maps more of a pass. I understand that completely. One of the things I noticed was the bullet drop. The bullet drop is so wonky, especially with any type of sniper rifle. I still don't understand it. I've played a lot of mil sims and a lot of FPSs. I've never seen a game where it feels like just an extra 50 meters takes your bullet. It feels like anything below that certain point, like you just put reticle on target, it hits every time. Easy. But go 50 meters more out past that line, that arbitrary line that the game draws in the sand. Go anything past that, and suddenly the bullet turns into a Battlefield 3 bullet, and it just nosedives into the ground and has ridiculous drop-off for literally no reason. I can't even understand. I can't grasp the concept behind this. I don't understand how it works. Now, the game's also lacking in a lot of areas. We have basically what is currently a hardcore Battlefield mod. It's like somebody took took Battlefield, modded a little bit, lessened the time to kill, added a little bit more realism, and called it a day. This is very, very bare bones. In terms of milsim mechanics, there's no fobs, there's no respawn points in terms of like rallies, there's no really any ability to work together, there's no commander, there's no flow to the battle. It just feels weird. It feels wrong. It feels like it's stuck in between a hardcore Battlefield mod and an actual milsim. So, just oddities that I've noticed within the game that hopefully we'll see some improvement on, and just quality of life changes that are more than needed. Okay, so now we get into the gunplay of the game. Like I said, I'd be coming back to this, because there's a lot more that I want to show off and discuss about the gunplay. Here is a handful of clips. I just used, I believe, like the more modern, insurgents versus, like US Marines or something along that line. But I played around with just about every gun that was available to me here, which, in all honesty, wasn't a lot. They had, I believe, 2 different AK variants, a PKP, and the Insurgent Sniper Rifle, which I didn't use because, again, every sniper rifle feels the exact same. There's no difference in it. I believe it's the SVD, and there's absolutely no difference in it whatsoever than any other marksman rifle currently. I used, for the Marine Corps US side, I use the M60 and the M16. I think it's the A2 that they're using. And I couldn't tell a genuine difference between any of them. They all felt the exact same. Aside from the obvious of you have burst fire on the M16 versus full auto with an AK. But between the two AK variants, I want to say that it's the AK-74 and the AK-47, right? So you're shooting two very different caliber weapons, and they feel the exact same. The recoil doesn't change. It feels you could just swap these two and no one would notice. Maybe the AK-47 had a tad more recoil, but it was completely controllable, as is both of the machine guns for both factions. Not only that, apparently they can do semi-auto, which is interesting. For a milsim trying to be realistic, very interesting choice. But as you can see right here, the machine gun just feels like it's nothing. You're just running around like a Battlefield game with this. There's no real gun handling. There's no recoil. And not only that, the time to kill is, well, interesting. It feels like like a Battlefield. Like somebody took a Battlefield game, modded it a little bit to be a little more quote-unquote hardcore and realistic, and shipped it out the door. This doesn't feel like it was done by a development team. The gunplay lacks in every conceivable way. There is nothing redeeming about the gunplay at all. Not only do the guns feel the same, you can't really tell when you're being shot at most of the time. You can't tell, like, if you're hitting your target. There's no good feedback. All of it just feels generic and lacking in every single way. Alright, this will be a good point to talk about the grenades, and also I'm going to cover kind of like the difference between hipfire and actually aiming down sights. So one thing I really noticed about the grenades is that, for one, your guy is weak as fuck. Holy shit. Can't throw more than about 10-12 feet in front of him. Also, I don't know if you've noticed, but the grenade animation is a little wonky. Doesn't feel right. Just doesn't feel good. The actual fragmentation grenade animation, I don't really have a complaint there. It's very generic. It's just kind of a small fireball, and that's about it. The smoke grenades, however, I actually kind of really like how they look. Not so much as like how they look like graphically, but how they function, I guess. So the way that they kind of almost work with wind, I can't really describe how they do it, but they look good in terms of like how they actually play out. With a slight graphic change and make them look a little sexier, a little more modern, I think the smoke grenades are just fine, actually. This is one of the few things that I think that this game got actually really, really right. Now, aside from that, we'll go into the actual differences between the hipfire and the aiming down sights, right? There is a absolute world of difference, which is fine for something if you want to play, let's say, Call of Duty or Battlefield. Like, I get it. Then you actually make players forcibly aim down sights to be more accurate. However, this is supposed to be a milsim, and hip firing in a milsim should feel borderline close to where you would be aiming down sights at shorter range, at least, right? So if I'm only about 10 feet away from my target, I shouldn't wonder if I'm going to hit the target. And there's just an insane difference in between the hip fire and the aiming down sights at just a small range. Alright? I'm not talking about 200 meters away, I get it. At that point, you're asking for a little much. But this is very close range, and it shouldn't look like this. Then you have the pistol here. I don't understand what the hell's going on. You're supposed to be a trained soldier in a milsim, right? So then why can't you even control a 9mm pistol? You have to sit here and tap shoot this thing, otherwise you're not going to hit anything. All of your shots are going to go really, really high. You cannot spam fire. You have to be very, very selective in the pace in which you shoot, right? You can't even double fire, like double tap the trigger, or else it will just be completely inaccurate. All your shots will just pull really, really high. I'm not really sure why that's a thing. There's just so many different, like, mechanics, core gameplay mechanics that I'm not understanding. It's like they're almost a cross in between this milsim and a more hardcore Call of Duty or Battlefield. That's kind of the feeling that I'm getting from the game. And that's kind of the issue. I don't feel like this is a milsim. And if it's not a milsim, then it's a hardcore Battlefield. And if it's a hardcore Battlefield, it's missing way too many of the elements of a hardcore Battlefield. It doesn't fit either group. Also, a little note for the animators here. You'll notice how I'm out of ammo on both weapons, which it is kind of cool that they actually lock the slide back on the handgun, and also they have the bolt locked back on the M4, so you can kind of see that it's out of ammo. However, you'll notice that it doesn't happen when you have the gun out. It's an animation. So them pulling the gun out, the slide then locks back. The M4 then pops with the bolt catch then pops out. Like, it's kind of an odd thing. Like, why wouldn't you just have it as that state when it checks for ammo? I'm not understanding.